Hello, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to another episode of this fabulous interview with our dear brother, Dr. Jay Smith. And we've already began the last couple of episodes to talk about some of the problems with the Quran. And today we are going to start basically doing a more of a critical analysis of different areas of the Quran. First one we are going to address right now would be the two compilations of the Quran. Dr. Jay, welcome again.
Well, good to be here again. Thanks so much. And we've gone through introducing the 6 areas we were going to be critical. Let's look at the 2 compilations, which we now have on the screen there. Now, remember, they claim it's an eternal book, that it was complete by 632, the first recension, and then it was another compilation that comes after that. And that's what we want to question in this episode. So how do we know this? Well, let's go back to the material that all Muslims are dependent on. To understand how the Quran was put together, they need to go back to Al-Bukhari. Who is Al-Bukhari?
Al-Bukhari, of course, is one of the renowned collectors of hadith, and he's the first one to take all of the sayings of Muhammad.
So he's the earliest compiler of the hadith, the sayings of the Prophet.
That's right.
Now, there are 9 volumes in his collection today. We need to go back to volume number 6, and we need to go back to hadith number 509 and 510. So let's look at volume 6, starting with hadith number 509 that we have up on the screen there. And we have it both in Arabic and in English, so you can see it side by side. Correct. And then on the left, we're just going to summarize what they're saying, because it'll take us too much time to unpack all of it. The first one, 509, Abdul says that between 632 and 634, that means right after Muhammad's death,
correct,
you had the Caliph Abu Bakr realized that the text was not written down, and Bukhari admits that since many who memorized it had died, therefore a large part of the Quran may be lost. So that's already there in the text. A large part of the Quran may be lost.
That's correct.
Really 2 years after Muhammad's death.
Yeah.
So you can see that there is a question here. How much of it is a large part? Zayd ibn Thabit. Now, this is the secretary of Muhammad. When he was given this responsibility to do it, he thought it was much too difficult to do so. Yeah, and the reason why is because
he feels a huge burden, and here's what he says, and I'm going to say it in Arabic first of all. كيف تفعل شيئا لما يفعله رسول الله? Meaning, why do you want to do something that the Prophet himself didn't do?
Absolutely. Yeah. It just rolls out of your mouth. It's amazing when you say it. I love to listen to that. But certainly you can see that he is saying, listen, even our Prophet couldn't do this, and you're asking me to do it?
That's right.
So you can see there's some question as to what's the wisdom in this. We move on, and Zayd ibn Thabit again, he finally agrees to do so. And so what does he do? He looks to find verses that are collected on palm stalks, on stones, and the memories of the surviving warriors. In one case, he only found it with one person, and that's chapter 9, verse 128 and 129, the last 2 verses of chapter 9. So it's fascinating that he had to look at these places to find it. It's not written down. Obviously, it's therefore not written down. And when Muslims try to come back and say, yes, it was written down at the time of Muhammad, they need to look and ask, look, even your own sources are very clear. It was not written down.
That's correct.
And it would be a problem for Zayd ibn Thabit because even the Prophet had not done this.
Not only that, but Omar admits that the idea of preserving it in memory is not really a valid idea because he was afraid that they're going to lose the Quran.
Obviously. So right there, when Muslims, and they do come back and say, we don't care. It doesn't need to be written down. It was memorized. Not according to Abu Bakr and not according to Umar. They realized that this had to be written down.
That's right.
Because what happens to one's memory?
It fades away, and once you transmit something after a while, after a period of time, things begin to change. Some details are not the same anymore.
Absolutely. Now, even what we're saying today, if we were to, of all the people who are watching this video, and if they were to go back and try to we've only taken 5 minutes, just what we've said in the first 5 minutes, if we were to ask the people who were listening to write down what we have just said, you can imagine there would be as many people that wrote it down, there'd be that many different renditions.
That's right.
50 people write it down, you get 50 different renditions of what we've said. That's the problem with memory. Memory, you only pick and choose what you remember. There's this great kids game that we play in birthday parties called Chinese Whispers. When you tell one person something, they tell the next and the next and the next.
Right.
By the time it gets to the 15th or 16th person, what you start with and what you end with are two different things. It's a great game. And that can happen within a period of 10 minutes. Can you imagine what would happen in this case over years? that in this case, you're going to see, we're going to talk about 20 years, it would change immensely. So they had to write it down. It's obvious they needed to write it down.
That's correct.
Now, you have the first compilation. This is the first recension, was first given to Abu Bakr, and then it was given to Umar, who was the second caliph, and then it was given to his daughter, who was Hafsa. She used to be one of the 12 wives of Muhammad.
That's correct.
Now, that was retained then for about the first 20 years. That's Hadith number 5 of 9. Now we skip to Hadith number 510. Let's look at the slide there. In the 510 now, we've now jumped 20 years, because now we're at the time of Uthman. Abu Bakr has died. Umar was killed. Uthman now is the caliph, and he became the caliph in 646. Now, we're roughly now 650, 652, so we're about 5 years to 7 years into his reign. You have a second problem. And it says right there that Hudayfa comes to him, and he's afraid that the people in Syria and Iraq would have different recitations of the Quran. So he's asking Uthman to have the Quran written down a second time, to rewrite the Quran using Hafsa's first compilation, that first compilation that was given to Hafsa.
That's correct.
Now, do you see a problem with that?
Absolutely. I tell you what's the problem is, obviously, Uthman didn't trust the first copy that was made. He realized there are more copies that are circulating around, and he...
Okay, right there, more copies.
Yeah, needed to
so
centralize
already
that.
There's admission that there are different Qurans.
That's correct.
This is an admission, huge admission. Why don't Muslims pick this up?
Because they only emotionally want to hear what they want to hear.
This is their material. We're not making this up. And you can see we've kept the Arabic there, we've kept the English literal translation, and we're just summarizing what is already there. On the right side of the screen, we're summarizing on the left.
That's correct.
So you've got some problems here. This is already admission that there were maybe different Qurans. In Syria and Iraq, there are different Qurans.
That's correct.
So at the very center of Islam, you're getting different manuscripts, different codices, admission of that. So Uthman orders 4 compilers, Zayd ibn Thabit, Zubair, Alas, and Hisham, to rewrite the text. Why do you need to rewrite the text if you've got it right there in Hafsa's copy?
And in fact, he asked him to bring that as one of those copies they want to review, but they ended up rewriting it, and as you know, Uthman decided on a certain dialect. Now, here's the central question. I thought there were 7 different readings of the Quran. Why would Uthman settle on one? Why not 7 different reading copies?
Okay, now let's back that up. Hold on a minute. Say that again. There were 7 different akhruf or kiryat.
That's what the Islamic tradition is, based on a hadith that was written 200 plus years after the time of Muhammad. If that was true, why did Uthman decide on one dialect only?
Aha. And what about the other 6?
Supposedly he burned them.
Okay, second, we haven't got to that yet. Hold on. You've jumped the gun on me on this one. But before we even get into that, let me ask you, as an Arabist, this is your scholar, you're the Arabist, you know what a dialectic difference is. How do you find dialectic difference in a consonantal text?
Well, you only find it when you have diacritical markings.
And diacritical markings are what?
Those are the markations you put above or below letters to help you vocalize and pronounce words.
You said that on a previous episode.
That's right.
In a future episode, we're going to actually show you. We're going to show you on slides what happens when you put the different dots in.
That's right.
So you have to have diacritical marks to separate the letters one from the other to know which letter you're looking at.
That's correct.
You can have just a little shape like this, a little bowl shape, a smiley face. 1 dot is a na, 2 dot is a ta, 3 dot is a tha, 1 dot below is a ba, 2 dots is ya, na, ta, tha, ba, ya. That's 5 different letters.
That's right.
From depending on where you put the dots.
But the only problem is Uthman didn't even use that.
Oh, wait a minute. So there were no dots.
Nothing.
At this time.
You can look at the copies, at least the early Quranic copies that would date to before or after Uthman, and they still don't have
Diacritical
it.
marks didn't exist in the 7th century.
They did not. It took about 100 to 150 years for the system to be developed.
What is Uthman saying here? This doesn't make sense.
Exactly. He's going just by the oral way of saying it.
I'm going to even dispute that he's not even saying this.
Well, that's at least what the hadith will insinuate, as if it was
when was the hadith
an oral.
written? When was this
200 years after.
240 years.
That's right,
The
to be
date,
exact. Yeah.
The date we're talking about, the date we're looking at is 870. Muhammad died in 632.
That's right.
So you're talking about 240 years later. 870 is when Bukhari died. So just before he died, he's writing this. Now, by the time 870 comes into play, we're talking about the late 9th century, where are the diacritical marks?
Right now, they are
870.
starting to be available. Yes.
They were all there.
Yes.
By 870, yes, Bukhari knows what he's talking about. But he's talking about his day.
That's correct.
This is a problem that would have existed in his day, these dialectic differences. So he's redacting on what he thinks must have been happening. He's redacting it back to the 7th century. He didn't know his own history. Probably because he didn't look at the earliest manuscripts like we are able to do today. So you can see immediately this is a 9th century problem redacted onto a 7th century environment.
That's correct.
And Muslims, you need to hear this, because you hear this argument from Muslims all the time. Oh no, these were 7 ahruf. That by definition, ahruf, you have to have diacritical marks to show the different ahruf.
That's correct. That's
so
correct.
In a consonantal text which has no dots, has no vowelization, no dhamma, no kasra, no fatha,
you're left to read it
those hadn't been
however you
invented
want.
yet. In the mid-7th century, none of this makes sense.
Absolutely.
Oh, I love this.
That's a good point.
Now, we need to make sure that we underline this, and I hope Muslims especially are listening to this, because these are the claims your leaders make, these are the claims your pundits make, and yet they don't make sense historically. We're doing historical critiques here. Let's move on. So, therefore, he has these for rewrite it in a dialect that didn't even exist, at least not in a written form. You could have had a dialectic in orally, yes, there was a dialectic difference, but not in a written text. Ooh, I love that. So, we get down to Uthman then sends a copy of this finalized Quran that is different than all the other ones. He sends a copy to 9 cities, and we've got the cities listed up there: Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, Cairo, Alexandria, Aden, Herat, and Nishapur. Those are the 9 cities. How do we know that? Because there were to every province, it says in the text.
That's correct, yeah.
We know there were 9 provinces. So 1 copy of this finalized, canonized Quran, perfect Quran, were sent to 9 cities. With every copy went a reader.
And I want to add this. The fact that there were no diacritical markings back then in the days of Uthman. So one will say the only concern Uthman has is the rasm that he used, which is the...
Now, you said an Arabic word there. Define what you mean.
Which is the shape of the words and the letters. Whatever words he used, he was disagreeing with other copies that have different words, and now we have the Sana manuscript to even prove things like this.
Okay, we're going to get to that. You're now really jumping ahead, because I can see you're getting at the bit. You want to get ahead. You want to get to the conclusion, but we still need to lay a foundation. We need to lay a base for what's happening
That's
here.
correct.
So he sent to 9 different provinces. Those are the 9. Where are they? Ooh, $1 million question.
Let me
This
think
is
like
the
a
elephant
Muslim.
in the room.
A Muslim going to come back and tell you, oh, it's in Samarkand. It's in top copy.
Please do. And I hope you Muslims who are listening, you do come back on us, because that's going to be the next episode. We're going to go into those that do exist. But no, we're looking for 9. We're not looking for 4 anymore, like we always thought. We're looking for 9. All right, now it continues on with Al-Bukhari, volume 6, 510. Now, once he sends the copies of this second compilation, a second rendition, a second different Quran, otherwise, why would you need to rewrite it? Obviously, it's different than the first one.
That's correct.
So a second compilation, a second Quran, written 20 years after Muhammad's death. Muhammad wasn't even there to see whether it was the same. He's been dead for 20 years. He then orders that all the Quranic materials, either fragmentary manuscripts or whole manuscripts, be burnt. Ooh, help me here. Come on, Al.
That's another proof that he did not like the way the others were written, because there are different words that were there than the copy he made.
The only reason you would ever burn anything is to destroy the evidence.
That's correct.
And what evidence would you want to destroy? Anything disagrees with your final copy. This is his final copy. He wants his name to go to it, and it is. Even today, they call it the Uthmanic recension.
That's correct.
He wants this to be his final copy, and he wants to destroy anything else that doesn't agree with it. Absolutely. Proving that this has nothing to do with Muhammad. Muhammad wasn't there. This has nothing to do with God.
And the question is, who authorized Uthman in the first place to do something like this?
And how do we know that Uthman's copy, created 20 years later by these 4 individuals, is anything like the one that's in heaven?
That's correct. Why didn't Uthman, for instance, use the Hafsa copy, which was even written closer to the time of Muhammad?
$1 million question. I would like to know what they did to Hafsa's copy. What happened to it?
Most likely it was destroyed as well.
Oh, dear. It just gets worse and worse as we go along. Now, you don't destroy copies unless you want to destroy the evidence. Wouldn't it be great if we had everything that was burned to look at? Wouldn't it have been great if they'd preserved those burn items so we could at least put it together and forensically try to find what was different in any of them?
And you know, Dr. J, here's what I wonder about. Why do Muslims get upset when the Quran is burned today when, in fact, their caliph burned Qurans?
At the very beginning. They need to look at that. And everything we're saying right now is from Al-Bukhari, Volume 6.
It's right here. Ladies and gentlemen, look at it. We have it on the screen.
There you go. Now let's move on. So, here are the questions I have. Question number 1, and we can go on the screen. Let's take a look at them. Why did God, first of all, use a language which could not accommodate the Quran? You've already told me
Absolutely.
that the 7th century Arabic script only used razm.
Correct.
He already had other languages. God had already used Hebrew and Greek with the Old Testament and the New Testament. There were lots of languages that were quite sophisticated, could have easily accommodated it. Why did not God use those languages to begin with?
Because the Arabic is limited to a small area, geographical area, and a small group of people. So how can the Quran be a message for all people?
Not only that, we know that the Arabic is a very new language. We don't have any reference to Arabic prior to the 2nd century A.D.
Correct.
And we know that it's derived out of the Nabatean script. The Nabateans, as we're going to find out later on, were very significant in what we know as Islam today. But that's for another video at another time. Nonetheless, we do know that it was crude. It was so crude, you could not even understand it that early. Now, in God's wisdom, I don't understand why he would have chosen this language. Secondly, why did he choose a man who could not read or write?
And that's another puzzling question, because the first revelation, as we mentioned earlier, that he received says read. What does that mean?
Akra.
If he doesn't know how to read, why would God even start his revelation to this man?
That's the first thing Gabriel said to him in the Hira cave. Akra. And what was his response?
I do not know what to read.
Ma akra. I cannot read. Well, that should have told Gabriel, okay, you got the wrong guy here.
He says,
Go somewhere else. Obviously, this guy cannot be the arbiter for the greatest revelation for in the history of mankind. If he cannot read, and that was his one goal, that was his one mission, why in the world did Gabriel still stay there with him and say it 3 times? 3 times, squeezing him after each time, according to the tradition again.
That's correct.
By that time, it should have been pretty clear that you've got the wrong man. Go get a guy who can read, a guy who can write. And because that is what his only responsibility is, to write this revelation down, to preserve it. Now, that was his only remit. Secondly, even if they still said, okay, we'll give him some more time. Of course he can't read. Why didn't he learn to read? He had 22 years.
And that was his language. It's not like something new anyway.
Listen, when I learned Arabic in London, it took me 2 weeks to learn the Arabic script, to read and write it. I didn't know what I was reading or writing. I didn't know Arabic. Muhammad did know Arabic.
That's right.
If it only took me 2 weeks to read and write the Arabic script, why in 22 years, could he not do so?
That's another puzzling question, of course.
And then, hold on a minute, didn't he have a scribe?
He did.
Didn't he have Zayd ibn Thabit?
At least more than once, but Zayd was one of them.
What do scribes do? What's their remit? What's their one responsibility a secretary is supposed to do?
To write.
That's right. So why didn't he give him the other authority or the responsibility to write it down? The whole time he was with them, wouldn't it be something that he should have done? Wouldn't that be something that should have been preserved?
That's correct.
So
and when we do have two, like Ubay and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, they both took it upon themselves to write their own. No one told them.
There you go. And then why didn't Abu Bakr make copies immediately of that which he wrote down? Why did he just give it one copy and give it to one woman? Shouldn't there have been many copies made, like Uthman made 9 copies? Where are the copies that Abu Bakr made? That's rather irresponsible of him.
And obviously he let basically this idea continue, because many took upon themselves to keep writing and writing and writing. And we have later many different Qurans, of course.
And then we brought this already up. This is the third set of questions, and that is, how could there be dialectical differences in the 7th century? These dialects, by definition, require diacritical marks. They require vowelization. That was not introduced until the 8th century. They were not finalized until the 9th century. And that you can see why al-Bukhari would have known about them, but certainly not the time of the 7th century or the 8th century.
Because he was reading backward from his days.
That's right. He's redacting it back, that view. And then, of course, as we already mentioned, why in the world would you burn something that was God's holy word, God's eternal word, the greatest revelation in the history of mankind, unless, of course, there was discrepancies.
Well,
Now,
Dr. J, this is great material. Is there anything else we want to add to this before maybe we wrap it up so we can come back again with another topic in our list?
well, I want to look, before we finish the compilations, I want to look at what the traditions say, because the traditions also go into this. They give us some troubling views. This is the Islamic tradition. That's the Sirah of the Prophet Muhammad. That means the Siratu Rasulullah, which would be the biography of the Prophet Muhammad.
That's correct.
First written by Ibn Hisham and Al-Waqidi. Then you have the hadith that we've already referred to by Al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Ibn Dawud, Tirmidhi, and the others. And then you have the tafsir first compiled by Al-Tabari in 923.
That's right.
And then those are the
please
exegesis of it. And then you have the
history,
tariq. So
Tariq,
you have the Sirah, Hadith, Tafsir, and Tariq. Those four genres. That's known as the Islamic tradition.
That's right.
So let's look and unpack and see what they say concerning how the Quran was compiled. Because what you're going to find is pretty disturbing, or in our case, pretty exciting. Let's start with them and let's put them up on the screen. There's Al-Bukhari, Al-Hajjaj, Ibn Dawud, Al-Tirmidhi, Al-Nasai, Ibn Majah, and then some would put a seventh one,
Muwatta Ibn Malik.
Okay, so those are really the 6 to 7 authoritative hadith compilers. And look and see what they say. So the first one by Ibn Dawud, what does he say?
He's saying many of the passages of the Quran that were sent down were known by those who died on the day of Yamama. He's talking about that battle. And they were not known by those who survived them, which means they were lost.
So many were not known, so we did lose quite a few. So this is a huge admission.
That's right.
Nor were they written down, nor had Abu Bakr, Umar, or Uthman collected the Quran, nor were they found with even one person after them. That's a huge admission right there by Ibn Dawud. So he's already saying that a lot of it was lost. And here's another one about disappeared. Go ahead and read that one.
That's
this is by
Suyuti. Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran. He's one of the renowned tafsir, basically scholars. It is reported, he says, from Ishmael ibn Ibrahim, from Ayyub, from Nafi', from Ibn Umar. And then he goes on to say, let none of you say, that's Ibn Umar saying this, the son of the Caliph Umar is saying this. Let none of you say, I have acquired the whole of the Quran, he says. How does he know what all of it is when much of the Quran has disappeared?
Oh, dear.
This is the son of the Caliph who lived at the time of Muhammad.
Rather, let him say, I have acquired what has survived. Why is it Muslims aren't reading this?
I find it that amusing to me because the early Muslims were really transparent and they were not thinking about the Quran as a rigid text.
They never make the claims Muslims today are
That's
making.
Right.
So it's obvious you need to go back. We're just reading their traditions. Let's go on to another one. Here are some verses were forgotten.
And this one has to do with the basically memorization, of course, what we used to recite a surah which resembles in length and severity to Surah Bara, which is chapter 9. I have, however, he said, forgotten it, with the exception.
And then he goes on and says what the exception is.
Exactly.
So here he's admitting that he has forgotten it.
That's right.
And here we have some verses were canceled against Sahih Bukhari. Now, hold on. Sahih Bukhari is the most authoritative because Sahih means perfect. So this is the greatest of all the hadith compilers. What does he say?
And here's what Bukhari is saying. He said, he's reporting here, someone saying, we used to read a verse of the Quran revealed in their connection, but later the verse was canceled. It was convey to our people on our behalf the information that we have met our Lord. And
canceled. Al-Bukhari is admitting that parts of it have been canceled.
And this verse doesn't exist.
Now let's continue with Al-Bukhari because he said that some verses were missing. And this is the great verse on Rajam. Go ahead and read this.
I mean, basically, we know that the stoning verse doesn't exist in the Quran, yet stoning is practiced under Sharia law.
So it's referring to Surah 24, Ayah 2. In chapter 24, verse 2, it says 100 lashes. But here you have Umar, who is really upset because he says, we used to stone, the Prophet used to stone after us, but I'm afraid that when they read the Quran today, they won't find that verse there.
That's right.
He's admitting that that verse has been taken out.
And this is one of Muhammad's closest companions who became the second caliph.
There you go. Huge admission here. Let's continue on. So, overlooked. This is Ibn Abi Dawud again. What does he say?
Ibn Abi Dawud saying, Khuzaymah ibn Thabit says, I see you have overlooked, notice, overlooked 2 verses and have not written them.
And
they
says,
said,
this is
and
what
then
they
he
are.
began to report them.
So you can read that for yourself. So there you have him saying that they have been overlooked. And now we come back to Imam Malik, the 7th major of the compilers, concerning Aisha. This is the wife of Muhammad. What does he say about Aisha?
Here's what it's saying. It's saying Abu Unus, freedman of Aisha, basically he was like basically a slave, mother of the believers, reported, Aisha ordered me to transcribe the Holy Quran and asked me to let her know when I should arrive at the verse, Hafadhu Salat al-Asr, basically. He's talking about the
Chapter 2, verse 238.
Yeah. Yeah, was Salati, and he was talking about chapter 2, verse 238. And he says, when I arrived at that verse, basically, I informed her, and she ordered, write it in this way.
So here she is telling him to write it a different way than he has memorized it. So here is a woman, wife of the Prophet, who is actually correcting and changing the Quran. I didn't know women could change the Quran, did you?
Well,
but there it is. Imam Malik refers to that reference.
If you ask my Muslim friends, why did Muhammad marry Aisha when she was young? They say, oh, it was by God's grace and wisdom so that she can learn from the Prophet. Well, there you have it.
And now she's changing what the Prophet had said earlier, if that had happened. Now, we come to another one that was modified, and this is by the Hadith Ibn Abi Dawud. What does he say?
He's saying, altogether, Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, that's another prominent name, by the way.
He is the governor of Kufa under Abdul Malik.
That's right. He lived in there.
So we're talking
he even made modifications and redactions of the Quran himself.
Okay, what is it and what happened?
He's saying made 11 modifications in the reading of the Uthmanic text. Notice, he changed the Uthmanic text.
11 times. So that's an enormous admission right there.
That's right.
Now we get to some verses were substituted. Sahih Bukhari again.
And here it's saying, but Allah says, none of our revelations do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, but we substitute something better or similar.
Now that's in chapter 2, verse 106. So that's in the Quran itself.
Exactly.
You can also find in 16, ayah 101.
That's correct.
The exact same thing. So 2 references to changing the verse or substituting a verse. Now we end with this one by Sunan Ibn Majah. What did he talk about? Eating it.
And that's an embarrassing one, of course. And it says, it was narrated that Aisha, once again, said the verse of stoning and of breastfeeding an adult 10 times was revealed, and the paper was with me under my pillow. When the Messenger of Allah died, we were preoccupied with his death, and a tame sheep came and ate it.
It ate it, okay. Now, just a review. Lost, disappeared, forgotten, canceled, missing, overlooked, changed, modified, substituted, eaten by sheep. Now tell me, Al-Fadi, does this sound like a book which was compiled perfectly and completely?
It's very obvious that that's not the case, and it's very obvious that the early Muslims in those days did not even look at it as something rigid that you have to fight over.
And in every case, these are intentional changes by humans.
Absolutely.
And this is what we're trying to prove. All these episodes, we're trying to show that this book does not come from heaven. It does not come from Muhammad. It doesn't even come from Uthman. These are later changes, and some of these are changes before Uthman, some come after Uthman. But you can see, we're talking about human intentional changes.
Absolutely. And as you can see, I mean, these changes were done after the death of Muhammad. It wasn't done even during his life. It was done later. So who's the author of the Quran in this case? Don't tell me Muhammad reported a message from heaven, because we know already it's Uthman, it's Aisha, and it's many others who authored parts of the Quran and changed it.
And even a sheep.
That's right. Well, I hope if you're watching, you've enjoyed this show, and please continue to basically follow this series, because we will be publishing these videos one by one, and we'll continue to talk about the different problems of the Quran, among many other topics that we will be doing with our dear brother, Dr. J. Until we meet again, have a blessed day. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss future videos. And please consider becoming a patron on patreon.com/Sierra International.